Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Victoria. I'm with the Family Focused Resource Center, and today we are happy to present a workshop for you about IHSS. This is part 2 in our IHSS series. It's about preparing for assessment and reassessment, and I'm going to hand it off to our presenters at Disability Rights of California.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having us today. For those who don't know us, I'd like to introduce myself, Lonnie Pfeiffer. I'm with Disability Rights California. We have our senior advocate, Mary Rios. And then your presenter for today is our senior attorney, Maria Iriarte, who will go over preparing for assessment, reassessment for IHSS. So for those who don't know us, we were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 1978. We are federally mandated to provide legal services for people with disabilities. We work on issues such as special education, public benefits, regional center services, housing, and so forth. Our offices are located in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and San Diego. Our smaller offices are in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. Thank you so much, and we'll go ahead and forward it to Maria Iriarte.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Victoria, for inviting us for this part 2 of 4-part series on IHSS. So today we're going to talk about how to prepare for an assessment when you initially apply for IHSS, and every year you're reassessed. So it's the same preparation pretty much, but it's really important that you do this. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to look at some of the tools that social workers use to determine how many hours they're going to give you for the services you've asked for. So we're going to look at the functional index ranking for adults, for minor children, the Vineland Maturity Scale. We're going to look at hourly task guidelines, and then we're going to look at a generic self-assessment template that we put together that you can use when you prepare for an assessment or reassessment. And then I'm going to go over a self-assessment that we did in a case that we took to hearing, so that you can see what it looks like. And because one thing, when I tell people you need to prepare for an assessment, it's like, well, okay, well, how do we do that? And secondly, you don't know this, but you will after this training. Once you've prepared for an assessment or reassessment, you've filled out the self-assessment template that we're going to provide you, you're pretty much ready for a hearing. You might have to tweak some things, but you've actually prepared for a hearing too, should you need to go to a hearing. So also at the end, we're going to give you some resources that you can look at. So what is the functional index ranking for adults? So once the social worker comes to your home and does an assessment of your needs when you initially apply, or in a reassessment every year, for all the services that you've asked the social worker to give you, the social worker is going to rank that service. So let's say, for example, I'm an IHSS, I want to get IHSS, and I tell the social worker that I can't prepare any meals because of my disability with my hands at all. I can't do anything. I can't cut. I can't move my fingers. There's no way I can cook. So I would hope that the social worker would give me a rank 5 with regard to meal prep. And that ranking is that I can't perform the function with or without human assistance. I just can't do it. I'm going to need someone to perform that function. Rank 1 is independent, meaning they're not going to give you any time because you could do it. It may take you a while longer than most people, but you could do it. Rank 2 is the only rank where the program will pay a provider to provide verbal assistance. So someone who, let's say that I need reminding to take my medication because otherwise I'll forget. So administering medication would be a rank 2. Rank 3 means I need some human assistance to do it. I can do it, but I need help. Rank 4 is I can do it, but I need substantial assistance. And rank 6 is for paramedical services. So remember, for every service that you ask the social worker to give you, that social worker is going to rank each service. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, where are the rankings? Because I don't know what they ranked me. Well, you're not going to see it in the notice of action. It is in your case file. And you can always ask the social worker to tell you what ranking he or she gave you. And we're going to see what the social worker does with this rank, with the rankings in a moment. Because secondly, I want to go to the functional index ranking for kids. So for kids under the age of 18, this is where you start your analysis. If you're a parent of a minor child, this is where you go to. This is the chart that you're going to look at to figure out whether or not the program is going to give you any time it's going to give your child any time, and what you need to do in case there's a ranking of 1. So if you see here, the first column has age 0 through 17, and then we have different categories of services in the other columns. Housework is domestic services. And if you look at the notes section, under the second note, it says minors who live with parents will get a functional index ranking of 1, regardless of extraordinary need. So if you're a parent of a parent provider of a minor child, your child is not going to get any domestic services, period, end of story. Okay. But if you look at the first note, it says all minors should be assessed a functional index rank of 1 unless there's an extraordinary need that is documented. So what does that mean? So for laundry, for example, let's say you've got a 12-year-old and you want to ask for time for laundry. If you look at the column for laundry and you go to 12 years old, there's a functional index ranking of 1, which means 1, when we're talking in the functional index ranking chart up above, means you're independent and they're not going to give you any time. But when we're talking about kids, it means the kid's not going to get any time. So back to the hypothetical laundry ranking of 1, what are you going to have to show? You're going to have to show an extraordinary need to get time for laundry, because otherwise they're not going to give a 12-year-old time for laundry. In the case that we're going to talk about that went to hearing, it was father and son who lived together, and father testified at the hearing. His son was 12 years old, I believe, at the time, that he goes to the laundry 3 times a week. The first time he takes the laundry and he does his laundry and his son's laundry. Nothing extraordinary about that. And one more thing, when we're talking about kids, you always have to compare your child with a disability of whatever age your child is. So let's say your child is 10 years old. Compare your child 10 years old with a disability to a 10-year-old without a disability. What can a 10-year-old without a disability do that your child can't do or needs help with? That's when the program could give you time. So in any event, and so the father testified that the 2 other times that he goes to the laundry that week, in a week, is solely for his son, because his son wears diapers. He soils a lot in bed while he's awake. He puts his hands in his diapers and smears feces on himself and everywhere else. So there's a lot of laundry happening and those 2 extra times. And so the judge in his decision said, I'm not going to give the father any time for that laundry that he would have done for his child anyway. There's nothing extraordinary about that. Parents do that, right? What is extraordinary in this case are the 2 extra times that because of his son's disabilities, he had to go to the laundry 2 additional times. That was the extraordinary need that the father testified to, and that time was given to the father. So it's really important to understand this chart. So let's say, for example, you're 9 years old and you're asking for preparing meals and meal cleanup. So you see that there's a ranking of 1 or 6. What does 1 mean? They're not going to give it to your child unless you can show an extraordinary need. So for a 10-year-old, what is the extraordinary need? What about preparing meals is extraordinary, right, for your child, or meal cleanup for your child? A 6, remember, a 6 will always be paramedical services that require some form of training. So a typical example is gas G-tube feeding, perhaps, or some other type of feeding that is considered paramedical in nature. And in some of these, for example, dressing at age 5, it says here that there's a ranking of 1 through 5. So it's possible that the social worker could rank the dressing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so I think I'm hoping you guys are starting to realize that it's really important to talk to the social worker about all the needs. Why you need to be able to tell the worker what services your son or the person needs, why the person needs these services, what about the disabilities, functional limitations prevent the person from doing it, or requires that the person need help. How much time are you asking for this task? And why are you asking? Why are you asking for that time? And we're going to look at the hourly task guidelines so you get an idea of what you need to show. But so anyway, so this, when you start, if you're thinking about applying for a child, or your child has IHSS, you need to be looking at this chart, because social workers use this chart. Administrative law judges, if you go to hearing, will use the chart. So this chart is really important. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop sharing, because Lonnie's going to take us to a document that the state, California Department of Social Services administers the IHSS programs statewide. And so on their website, they have a lot of information, and they have trainings for social workers, and they post the material online. So Lonnie's showing you, and we're giving you the link so you'll be able to do that. She's showing you where to find the Vineland. There's so much information here that's really useful. So Lonnie, you can show us where. So she's scrolling down to the bottom, and so the Vineland, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know, how do I know whether my child is developing typically, or whether my child is not developing typically? Well, CDSS, IHSS developed this, what is called the Vineland Social Maturity Scale. So if you see the first column, it says domestic services, and then there's an age, second column 8, and then expected behavior, able to do simple household tasks. Meal prep and meal cleanup by age 5. A typical child without a disability uses a knife for spreading. At 6, uses a knife for cutting. At 8, can wash and clean up, right? At 17, able to cook simple meals and clean up. So, so when I'm working on a case and I'm thinking, well, what is it I look at my client's age of 10, say, for example, and I'm thinking, well, what would a typical child of age 10 be able to do concerning certain things? Obviously, some are obvious, right? I mean, a 10-year-old can without a disability can eat without any assistance. And it's easy for me to come up with, well, a 10-year-old with a disability can, and this is why. But in any event, it's good to have, and you're going to see how we use it when we prepare for a hearing. So this is always useful to have. Thank you, Lonnie. So we're going to go back to the presentation. And so that was the Vineland Maturity Scale. This is the link to where you could find it, and a lot more information. So now let's go to the hourly task guidelines. So the social worker has ranked each service that you're asking for. And in my case, we had talked about meal prep, and I'm hoping that the social worker will rank it a 5 because I need total human assistance to prepare meals. Well, this is an hourly task guidelines that social workers use to kind of figure out how much time to give someone. So the first column has the categories. So we've got, the first one is meal prep. And then each ranking has a different color. So orange for rank 2, yellow for rank 3, green rank 4, and purple for rank 5. And let's look at the purple for rank 5. It says low, mid, and high. So it seems like if you're a rank 5, if you're on the low end of giving of hours, it looks like they would give you 7. So these are like the maximum hours guidelines that social workers can give you. So low is 7, mid is 7, and high is 7 hours a week. Now, let's say that I get my notice of action, and I had talked to the social worker about getting 10 hours a week in meal prep, and I explained in detail why I need that amount of time for someone to prepare my meals. And in my notice of action, I noticed that the social worker gave me only 7 hours. And I call the social worker and I say, I don't understand why you gave me 7 hours, because I told you why I needed more hours than this. And she's going to say to me most likely, well, that's the most I can give you. Well, that's not true. What she's looking at is she gave me the 7 hours per the guideline, but the guideline also says that if there's an exception for more time, you can give more time. Also, the reverse. If there's an exception for less than the low time, they can give you less than the low time. But so when the social worker said to me that, Maria, that's the most I can give you, that's not exactly true, because if she should say to me, do you have any, I can give you more time if there are exceptions. And I really didn't think I didn't believe in your, whatever the reason was, right? But there's always an exception to guidelines, because you'll see material out there, and we even have a self-assessment that we have online, and it says, for example, under domestic services, 6 hours total maximum per month of domestic services, actually, because related services could be more, because there could be an exception, right? All of this is an exception. So I always talk about the case I did years ago, because it's really telling and compelling. I represented a gentleman who needed a lot more than 6 hours a month in domestic services, and the social worker kept on telling me, no, I can't give you more. Went to hearing. My client testified as to why, based on his disabilities, he needed more time than 6 a month, and the judge awarded him more than 30 hours in domestic services. So if you want more than what the guideline says, you have to explain it. What's the exception to the guidelines? You have to give a lot of information to the social worker. And I think some of you may be saying, but they don't want to listen to me. They come, especially with a reassessment, all they do is come to the house, ask questions. Most of the time is spent signing paperwork. And I say to you, well, you just be ready with that self-assessment form that I'm going to show you guys and give it to the social worker and let the social worker look at it, ask questions. And someone in a training said, well, what if they don't want to accept it? Well, you can't force them to take it, but should you go to hearing, you can explain to the judge that you tried to give this document to the social worker and the social worker refused to take it. And it makes the social worker look bad. It looks like he or she wasn't really doing a fair assessment of you, right? So, but in any event, these are the hourly task guidelines. Remember, there's always exceptions to give you more. And in I think part 3 of the series of these IHSS trainings, there are a couple more tools that you're going to be looking at to figure out what are those exceptions, examples of exceptions to the hourly task guidelines. Now, this is the document that we prepared to go to hearing, or also for the assessment or reassessment. So what you see here is you have a column of category of services, and you see domestic services or housework, MPP, Manual of Policy and Procedures, section 30-757.11. Those are the regulations. You need to think about the regulations as the rules that need to be followed. And we have a link in our resources section to these regulations. So you can go directly to the regulations and look up all the information on domestic services. Not only that, we have a manual online for IHSS. There's a lot of material out there on IHSS. So the first column has services. If this is a new assessment and you've never had IHSS before, you're going to get a Word version of this, meaning you can move it around. You can get rid of this column. You're not going to have a column for authorized county hours because you've never been assessed. This is your first assessment. You can take that column out. And then you would have the column hours that the claimant is requesting. But if you are being reassessed, you're going to have a notice of action, right? If you're going to go to hearing, you're going to get a notice of action, and you can fill this out to prepare for hearing. But even for a reassessment, you could put the county authorized hours in the prior notice of action and what you're requesting in any new services. So you can adapt this document to your needs, and it's in Word version. So we've got domestic services, related services, what they are. So we've got non-medical personal care services. Then we've got all the services here: transportation, protective supervision, paramedical services, some time-limited services that you might have discussed in the first training. But this is a recap of what is going to happen next, because this is where you start to fill in the template. So you've got the IHSS regulations that you can look at. All of the tools, the ones we've seen, and some of the others you'll see in part 3 of the training are here. And so this is a long template because we wanted to put all of the information here. So how it looks is that we have domestic services, the regulation, and the definition as it is defined in the regulation consists of these different categories of service, right? You need to know, how are you going to ask for IHSS if you don't understand what the services are that are provided under the program? And so then for each sub-service that you're asking for, let's say I'm asking for time to take out the trash and clean the bathrooms because I need assistance with that. So for each service, I'm going to rank myself. Well, what's my ranking? Do I need total assistance? a rank 5 for someone to take out my trash and clean my bathroom. What is my ranking? I give myself my own ranking. And then I explain for each one, for taking out the garbage and cleaning the bathroom, why I'm asking for it. What about my disability prevents me from doing it? And what kind of help do I need? And what kinds of hours, what time am I asking for, right? And it says right here, 6 hours unless there's an exception. And for all of these services, there could be an exception. And so then we go to the next related services, prepare meals. What does it consist of? Menu planning, taking the food out of the refrigerator, washing your hands, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're thinking about how much time you're asking for, remember, it takes time to prepare meals. And an exceptions could include, for more time, could include that, the type of food that you eat. If you are someone who for breakfast will have a coffee and toast, that's not going to be a lot of time. But if you are someone who for breakfast has like a full breakfast, you have oatmeal and coffee and toast and fruit, that's going to require more time than someone who just eats a toast and drinks some coffee. Also, the number of times you eat can affect the time that you need. If you're someone who eats 2 meals a day versus someone who eats 5 meals a day, well, the person who eats 5 meals a day will get more time. But you have to explain why you need 5 meals a day, and what about your disability prevents you from preparing your meals, for example. So the summary would be here. I would rank myself for meal prep, for example. Remember, what's the exceptional need for the child? If you look at the functional index ranking for minors and it shows a 1 for the age of the child, you're going to have an exceptional need to get time for meal prep for the child. And then if there's anything in the Vineland maturity scale that will help me to explain that a child, of my child's age without a disability can do this, but I can't, then you would put the information here. When I show you what we did for the hearing, it's going to make more sense. And then a summary of what I want for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and snacks. I have to break it down every meal, because every meal could be different. Some meals may be prorated, because it's possible, for example, and you're going to see in the example that I show you, if I live with someone and my provider makes my meals and the person I live with shares my breakfast, well, the time that I request for breakfast will be divided by 2, because the person who lives with me, who's not in the IHSS program, is eating breakfast the provider made, and the program's not going to pay for the provider to make breakfast for someone who's not on the program. So depending on the facts of your case will depend, how much you're going to get for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, whether there will be proration, whether there's a generic resource. So if, for example, I go to a day program and they provide breakfast and lunch three days a week, that time is going to be deducted from my total need, because I'm getting some of what I need from an alternative resource. And so the document just goes on and on and on, and it's in that format, and it's up to you to fill it. And so let's see what we did in a case we took to hearing. So you're going to get this, and you can, at the end of the day, it doesn't have to look like this document, as long as you have all the information that you need to present. And believe me, once you've done this and completed it, you're almost ready to go to hearing. You might need to get evidence. You might need to find documents that will support your position, or have witnesses at the hearing. But you know, you've done a lot of the homework already in preparing for that assessment or reassessment. So this is, the names have been changed to protect our client. So Mario, so what happened in Mario's case is that he had been receiving IHSS and he was reassessed, and the county issued a notice of action on September 22nd, 2020. And the notice of action gave him time for meal prep of 1.1 hours a week, meal cleanup 1.45, routine laundry 2.15, and you can see exactly what the county gave the client for a total hours of 86.95 a month. Now, note, we've only listed the services that we're disputing. I didn't list all of the other services that we were okay with and the time that we were okay with, because I want the judge to know exactly what we're fighting here at this hearing. So we're fighting these categories of services: meal prep, meal cleanup, routine laundry, feeding, dressing, and all bathing, oral hygiene, and grooming. We want more time, and you can see in the third column what time we're asking for. So rather than an hour and 10 minutes for meal prep, we're asking for 4.19 hours. And you'll see that there's a difference between what the county gave him in hours versus what we want. And by the way, we went to our initial hearing. Because the county was saying, well, he's 12 years old and, you know, we can't give him time because it's the parent's responsibility. What they're really saying, and he's 12 years old, what they're really saying is, if we look at the functional index ranking for 12 years old, for example, laundry, meal prep, meal cleanup. Hold on, sorry to do this to you, but I think it's important that so he's 12 years old, laundry is 1, meal prep or cleanup, it's a 1 or a 6. He doesn't get paramedical services, so we're looking at 1. So we're having to establish an extraordinary need to get time for this child. And so at the hearing, the county agreed to reassess him for these services. And what you see here, sorry about this, is the second notice of action that they issued, where they gave him they hadn't given him any time for meal prep, meal cleanup, routine laundry. No time at all. So in the second notice of action, after the first hearing where the county agreed to reassess him, they gave him some time, but not enough time. So this is a summary. This is a summary of what we're asking the judge for, right? So we start off with our summary, and this time you get, after doing all of the work I'm going to show you, and then you just put it in here. Now, if you're just getting assessed for the first time, and you're just doing an assessment that you're going to give the county, of course, you're not going to have a column that says county authorized hours, because they're not authorized yet. You would have the categories of services that you want and the time that you're asking for. So you would have 2 columns rather than 3. And here's where we started talking about the case. So we started with meal prep. We gave the child a functional index ranking of 5, saying that he needs total assistance with meal prep. So what we did is we of course we have to show an extraordinary need, because otherwise he's ranked 1, so we have to show. And then we use the Vineland Vineland tool to say that a child age 5 can already use the butter knife, and 6 actually. Mario's 12 years old. He can't spread butter. He can't even use a knife. All of his food has to be cut up into small bites. When he attends school, they need to prepare his food, cut it up into small pieces. And so we had to give, we're talking extraordinary need, but we had to give the judge a sense of Mario's dinner, what he eats, so that the judge could understand what the extraordinary need is and how much time to give him for that extraordinary need. So for breakfast, we put down that his dad will pour a glass of milk while preparing the breakfast. Breakfast typically includes eggs, some form of these things, beans, tortillas with cheese, pancakes, butter on his bread, fried banana, cereal, combinations thereof. It typically takes 15 minutes since his food has to be cut into bite-sized pieces. So 15 minutes a day. And by the way, it's prorated for breakfast because his dad eats the same food that he gives to Mario. So it's divided by 2. So we're saying it's 7.5 minutes a day times 7 days a week for 52 minutes, 0.5 a week just for breakfast. Snacks, they're only for Mario. There's no proration, and we give an idea to the judge of the types of snacks that he eats. Again, they require cutting into small pieces. Snack prep time usually takes 5 minutes, 2 snacks a day, so 10 minutes a day times 7 days a week, 70 minutes of preparing snacks. For lunch, that's the big meal. That's the meal where the father makes the big meal, right? He'll make a beef dish or a chicken dish, pasta, soup, grilled chicken, vegetables. It takes him around 20 minutes to prepare the meal. You might be thinking 20 minutes. Wait a minute, it takes longer to cook, to prep the meal. Remember, the program will not pay for the time that the meal is actually cooking on the stove or in the oven. It's only the prep time for the meal. So because the father eats the same lunch as Mario, 20 minutes a day, prorated by 2 people, so the actual time is 10 minutes per day, 7 days a week, 70 minutes. Dinner, he reheats the food that he made for lunch. 10 minutes, prorated because father eats the same thing, 35 minutes a week. So this is why the judge gave the client time for meal prep. It is for 2 reasons. First, he has an extraordinary need in that he needs to have, a 12-year-old can cut up his or her own food. Mario can't. So, and father needs to cut all of his food into bite-sized pieces. So that is the extraordinary need. It's not the fact that the father is making the meal, but it's the fact that a child of 12 years old without a disability can cut his or her own food, right? Not Mario. The other thing that made it extraordinary here that the judge gave time for was the behaviors. Because during the time, and there was a lot of testimony at the hearing about his behaviors, not only when the father's preparing meals, but for a lot of things that the father has to do for Mario. So while the dad is preparing food, Mario will have some kind of behavior where he starts biting himself, becomes combative, maybe because he's hungry, maybe because he soiled his diapers or for whatever other reason. And so dad testified that he has to stop preparing whatever he's doing and deal with the situation and then come back. I honestly thought, because we worked on this case, a number of us, I honestly thought that what the judge was going to do in this case with regard to this was say, okay, so during the time that he becomes combative and dad just needs to stop what he's doing, we're going to stop the clock, right? Just, he has to go deal with it. But we decided, the group of us, to include the behaviors. And I'm glad that we did, because the judge in his decision said the behaviors and the extraordinary need that was an extraordinary need, as was, because a 12-year-old without a disability doesn't have the behaviors while the parent's cooking, right? and cutting up the food. Meal cleanup, we ranked him a 5, an extraordinary need, because using the Vineland maturity scale, a child of age 8 can clean up after him or herself and wash his or her own dishes. Mario can't do it. And so meal cleanup for both father and Mario typically takes 10 minutes each time, with the exception of 2 snacks. There's no proration on that. So breakfast prorated is 5 minutes times 7 days a week is 35 minutes. Lunch prorated 5 minutes, 7 days a week. Dinner, snacks, etc. So he was given additional time for meal cleanup too, because of the extraordinary need. He's a child at 12 who can't do it. And a child of 8 years old can do it. That's a typical child. The laundry we talked about earlier. So, you know, 1 time a week, he does the laundry for both. Father does both for father and son, but 2 times a week because he soils. And there was testimony as to all of that. There was an extraordinary need for those 2 times, and the judge gave him that. Feeding, we gave him a rank of 4 because he could feed himself. He can't use utensils, but he could feed himself small things. A 1-year-old eats with a spoon, drinks unassisted from a glass, and chews. A 2-year-old eats with a fork, and an 8-year-old can care for self at the table. Mario can't do any of this. So we're trying to show, like, you know, he's not your typical 12-year-old. He's got extraordinary need. And then we took from an independent evaluation at school information that, you know, that he requires hand over assistance to help him learn how to eat, but he still can't do it. That he can feed himself things such as bananas and crackers and potato chips, but they need to be cut up into bite-sized pieces. So that's the extraordinary need for feeding. When he uses utensils, the father will place his hand over Mario's to assist him. Feeding can take 25 minutes for each meal, blah, blah, blah. But here's the deal. Even when he feeds him, he becomes combative. So if he's not fed fast enough, or he wants a diaper change or whatever it is, maybe he'll bite himself. Maybe he'll try to hit his father. So his father has to stop and calm him down. Sometimes he'll eat really slowly, or he'll stare into space or start clapping. So these are all things that a typical 12-year-old wouldn't be doing. So it takes a lot of time for dad to redirect him or to deal with the behaviors. I can tell you the behaviors in this case was key to getting him some hours, because there was an extraordinary need here. Dressing, we ranked him a 4 so he needs substantial assistance. At 5 years old, a child can already dress him or herself. Mario isn't able to without assistance. He just can't do it. So Mario is dressed up to 3 times a day since he soils his diapers and clothes. It could be challenging to dress him because he can become combative or laugh for no reason, or otherwise make it difficult for his dad to change him. It can take up to 20 minutes to dress or undress him. And he has at least 1 accident a day where he soils himself and he has to change his clothes. So we're saying, you know, he's got that, you know, because typically you would have, for a child, a 12-year-old can dress him or herself. We've got a child who can't do it, and we've got a child who has behaviors, and there's an extraordinary need here. So I just want you guys to understand that you have to give a lot of information, right? So that especially not only the social worker, but if you have to go to a hearing, the judge understands what's here, right? The needs of the person, the limitations of the person, and why you're asking for the time that you're asking. In bathing, oral hygiene, and grooming, we ranked him a 5. And in the Vineland maturity scale, a 4-year-old washes his hands and face unassisted. A 6-year-old bathes himself with some assistance, and an 8-year-old combs and brushes his or her own hair. Mario is 12 and cannot do this without assistance. And if you look at the functional index ranking for kids, a 12-year-old can be ranked from 1 to 5. So this is not a case where it's even a 1. So and this is not a case where you have to ask for an extraordinary need, because it's not a 1. You're only looking at extraordinary need when it's ranked a 1 on the functional index ranking. So here we put that he's dependent on his father to bathe, groom, oral hygiene. What does bathing consist of? Managing the faucets, assisting him get in and out of the tub, reaching his head and body parts for soaping, rinsing, and drying. On an average, he's bathed twice a day because he'll have that accident, right? And he plays with his feces and he'll smear himself. And bathing can take up to 20 minutes a day each time. So 40 minutes a day for bathing. Why? He becomes combative during bathing. So there's a lot of behaviors here. For grooming, it consists of combing and brushing his hair twice a day. After his bath, he's got long curly hair. Here he also can become combative because he's got long curly hair. He gets knots. The task takes 3 minutes each time, 6 minutes a day. Cutting the fingernails twice a week because dad needs to keep the fingernails really short because of the issue of putting his hand in his diaper. So again, Mario really doesn't like this. And so, I mean, there was testimony at the hearing as to just how difficult it was to cut his toenails and fingernails. Brushing his teeth has to be done twice a day because he can become combative. It typically takes 10 minutes each time, so we're asking for 20 minutes a day. So Mario has difficulty with sensory processing while he's being groomed, and so he also fears that any movement his father does will hurt him and becomes combative. So there's a lot happening. And at the end of the day, for grooming, brushing, and all of that, 1 hour and 21 minutes a day, 7 days a week. So it's a total of 8 hours and 47 minutes. If you want to get this time, you really have to you have to give a lot of detail, right? I mean, you see the detail. I think I was naive for a long time when I would say to people, just prepare what you need, why you need it, how much time you need, and why you need the time. That doesn't begin to tell you just how much work you have to put into something like this. But I can guarantee you that, I can't predict what the social worker will do with the information, hopefully the right thing. But I can tell you that you are really prepared to go to hearing, because this is the kind of information that the judge is going to want to elicit from you, right? To understand why you're asking what you're asking for and why you're asking for the time that you're asking. So there's a lot of detail here. So this is what we used. Some resources, the IHSS Training Academy. Remember when Lonnie took us to the Vineland? So on the California Department of Social Services website, so the social workers get trained, and it's called the IHSS Training Academy. And there's really good material there for people to look at. And all of this stuff is there under the IHSS Training Academy, State Fair Hearings, the Hourly Task Guidelines. You've got a lot of resources here. So we've come to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions or to clarify things. I'm going to leave. I'm not going to stop sharing in case I need to go back to any of the tools that we've seen. So we can go ahead and stop the recording and go ahead and.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank our presenters from Disability Rights, Maria Mary and Lonnie for providing all this great information. We will send out some of these documents, all these documents that they've shared to the people who registered for this workshop. So as long as you registered with your email, we will send this out to you later. And again, we want to thank everyone for being here. And we will post this workshop to our YouTube channel later today or tomorrow. Okay?
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye. Bye.